Thank you, first of all, for having me here. Let's start with Christine. But I'm going to ask the same question of all of you. So, have you reviewed the practices of your business? And if so, what have you uncovered?
Yes, to some degree. So, as you know, like with interior design, there is just a lot of different things that we touch. We're not only, looking at textiles and furniture, like materials like wood and tile and stone, but we also get involved with exterior finishes and, decking materials. And so, I think it's a lot for us to stay on top of. And I think for us, it's really about how do we take even little steps to minimize that waste, whether it's like double checking tile calculations for overages, or making sure we're recommending materials that are more sustainable to our clients, and looking at also textiles, right? Like, how do we source textiles that are more sustainable using natural fibers, or if they can be fully recycled easily. So those are all kinds of things that we have to look at, and I feel like being more of a generalist, it's definitely more of a challenge in the interior design industry, because you have to know a little bit about everything, and it's hard to get deep on every single material and topic.
Marcus, how about you?
Oh yeah. Well, I think for Gensler, so waste internally. So we actually studied this like in 2018. We were moving from in San Francisco. We were moving from 2 Harrison, beautiful office under the Bay Bridge, Hills Brothers building. Everyone loved it. We were moving to a temporary space for 5 years at 45 Fremont. That's where we are now, near Salesforce building. And so during that study, we said, hey, it's a temporary lease. Like, how could we not build this space to like a permanent status, right? It's going to be there 5 years. We had a research team put together. It was called What's Old is New Again. We studied our build out. We studied offices that had recently been completed. So New York office, the Denver office, San Diego, London, which was a really temporary space. It was supposed to be 2 years, but they were actually there for 3 years, called Base Camp. And we learned a lot. We learned about how, basically Gensler, about 5 to 6 offices a year are going through renovation all the time. And there's a bunch of waste that's generated from that. And so the team studied, they talked to each team. How did you look at waste? What were challenges that you had when you were building out your offices? New York was a lead gold project, and so they studied it from a certification standpoint, but we learned a whole lot from, just so much information from that. So where we are today, we're actually, I talked to Christine, we're now moving again. Our 5-year lease is over, believe it or not. We were only there for 2, because we worked from home for 2 of those years. But we are moving again to 220 Montgomery Street. And so that office, all the things that we learned in 2018, we are now applying to our new space at 220 Montgomery Street. And we're taking some of those ideas too, and I'll talk about this a little later if we want, how this connects to the social side of materials. So anything that we're not using in our new office, materials that, hey, we can't reuse it, we're not going to take it with us, we're finding ways to donate that to our communities. So through nonprofit organizations, we have a list, other people have lists, we're getting that in the hands of others that can use the materials.
First off, thank you for moderating this. Thanks for all being here. And thanks for the GFDA for putting this on. Yeah, I'd say for us, it's very tactical. So we're a manufacturer. We have 2 factories. It is literally like dumpster diving to figure out what's in there. It's weighing our trash. It is reporting on it as on a monthly scorecard and dashboard that we share internally and externally, and really just trying to tackle bit by bit solutions. Every step along the way. So I think it's been really tactical. It's been a multi-year journey. We've had some commitments that we have not been able to honor. We've also exceeded expectations in other places. So we've had people who have, spun up, ideas and initiatives and then leave, and it's like, oh no, they're not here anymore. Now what do we do? So we faced it all, and I think learned a lot along the way. But definitely, I'd say, we set targets, we've measured, and then hold ourselves accountable by reporting.
This question is for Marcus. Being that Gensler works on, massive corporate contract projects, are you finding that they're mainly ground up builds, or are you seeing some adaptive reuse? What are you seeing out there in the field?
Well, good question. So you can imagine, so we go just say San Francisco, you can imagine that a lot of people are not going back to offices right now. There's pretty much an empty downtown that we all know about, we read about. And so I mean, I wouldn't, it's not, I mean, the word adaptive reuse kind of plays into that a little bit. So office to resi is a big topic. Office to science was a big topic maybe a year and a half ago. But the work that we're doing, I mean, it really started, Gensler started with interiors and it moved into architecture. There's now large planning projects, not here, but, overseas. But we're seeing that majority of the work is still within the interiors piece. There's a lot of work that, things are changing. Workplace design is changing. People are working differently. So there's a lot of, changing of space there. So our work, I think, predominantly is staying within kind of the interiors box, if you will. Not so much the ground up. The ground up, I mean, things that we're doing with ground up, because we are part of AIA 2030, anything there is like, we're looking at mass timber. We're looking at these large projects that really start to look at the core, the building shell as like this piece. And there's a lot of, the experts against her, the people that, like Christine was saying, that they're the generalists like myself, but then they're also the specialists that really dive deep into that. And so a lot of those projects are a very, like, they're like less, where I say the stuff that we're doing, majority are the interior renovation stuff still.
So Christine, you're doing residential and hospitality interior design. So what are you finding in terms of clients, and are they wanting new builds, and are they open to even sourcing vintage pieces?
So right now we do a lot of renovation. I would say, like, for us, new builds are definitely on a smaller percentage of projects. For clients, I would say right now, like, most people don't care about sustainability, to be honest. Mm-hmm. They really don't, or it's not top of mind. It's more of like a side effect of caring about health concerns. Health, I would say, is number one right now, where people want healthy materials and, like, they care about the VOCs, off-gassing, things like that, because they see that directly affect them. But sustainability, I've maybe had 2 clients where they called that out, where it was like, this is really important, and we have it on our questionnaire. I would say, like, how we approach it is, for the clients who do want vintage, then we go all in, right? It's like, let's do this, because that's how I source for myself personally. And we try to bring in, like, okay, let's source from local makers, or, from American made versus, the shipping across the, all the oceans. And so it's, we try to piece together a plan as we're designing for our clients that, at least tries to minimize any kind of waste or environmental impact just through the materials that we suggest to them. And it's not necessarily calling out everything, where it's like, okay, we're showing you this 100% wool fabric because it's completely sustainable. It's not even like part of the conversation, really. It's really just about presenting the design. This works for the design, and by the way, it's also sustainable.
It's funny, because my next question was, what are clients requesting when it comes to sustainability? So I guess not much. So
Fireclay Tile.
What? Yes, or sourcing from Fireclay Tile, but we don't sell the recyclability necessarily, because they don't care about that, right? So it's like, if they care about the design first, then it's like, we still can create a beautiful design while thinking about the sustainability aspect ourselves.
Eric, I've got a question for you. What does Fireclay do with the excess tile?
You want me to admit that there's excess tile? We're perfect. Everything's perfect. There's no waste. Yeah, it's fairly notorious. Anyone who's ever done ceramics, it's I see that nods. You know what I'm talking about. It's painful. So, the industry norm in ceramics or in tile is 10% waste, 90% first quality. And that's not including overage on a job site or anything like that. So just our own. So first off, we're a job shop. We are made to order. Say 90% of what we do is made to order. We have a small stocking collection. It's about 10% of our sales. So the first and foremost is we're making exactly what a customer wants. So we're not kind of taking bets. We're not putting risk out there. We're making exactly what you want, and we're doing it real time, just in time. So that's one approach to minimize waste and things sitting around. I'd say the second thing is we average about, 90% first quality too. We've had months as strong as 94%. Our goal this year is 93%. But everything like the changing weather wreaks havoc on us. A machine starts bugging out on us. Kilns get weird. A supplier sends us a bad batch of frit. And so last month we were at 80%. And that's like I don't even know if we've had a month like that before. It was terrible. I'm a little down about it, to be totally honest. For anything that we can't reuse, which is most of it, if it's been fired. If it hasn't been fired yet, we can reprocess it. We send it to a local recycler who grinds it up and puts it into roadside beds. So that's like the majority of what we do. We do have a seconds program now. It's actually been pretty successful where sometimes we ship an order to someone and they're not happy with it. It's not the right color. Sometimes a client makes a mistake, orders the wrong thing. We'll take that back now. We'll resell it. If we have a batch that we make where it's a large amount of product and the color's off, we can now sell that. So we now have a pretty vibrant seconds process. But yeah, I mean, it is a constant battle of like the ceramic goddesses and gods of like how we can do a better job with our own quality. That's what we do, is really try to do it right the first time by having people order exactly what they want. Second, we have a recycler who puts it into roadside beds and crush it, and that's very local. And then the third thing would be resell it on our seconds market.
Kind of curious from all of you with this question, but what are the challenges in areas you feel builders and contractors can improve to lower waste in their own practices? And how are your companies pushing this?
Well, I mean, working with builders and the contractors, I mean, we'll walk a job site and they know that they do everything that they can, right? They have waste diversion. There are things that they have to follow by code based on the jurisdiction they're working in. But I mean, the construction site itself, like when they're taking it apart, you know, the say it's an interiors project, you know, there's a lot of things that just go into bins that are maybe slated for recycling or some sort of waste diversion, but they just can't reuse it. There's so much of it. So I just walked a site actually last week in Palo Alto, which has very strict standards, and you know, they have a material reuse ordinance for anything that's coming down, but this is for interior, so it's not there yet. And the contractor, I mean, there are doors, there's light fixtures, there's carpet tile. I mean, this stuff was just put in like 4 years ago. It's still great stuff, but they don't know what to do with it, and they need to get it off site. And so I think it's almost like how we can help them, right? And so I think being very clear in the drawings that we put together for them, we believe that, I mean, this is what we're working on at Gensler, that it's not a demolition plan, it's a deconstruction plan. So you have to kind of think of it, it's almost like the IKEA instructions where you kind of turn it the other way around, and it's like this tells you how to put it together, the other side tells you how to take it apart. We need to help the GCs, because it's all about pricing and schedule and time, deconstruct projects. And so that's through specifications, that's through the drawings, because demolition contractors don't look at specs so much, so the specs actually have to be on the demolition or deconstruction plans. The detailing, so we're into construction, right, which would also help them, is that we're designing this so that pieces can be deconstructed. So if it's simple things like millwork, right, millwork has to go in a certain way that you can at least take it out, and take it out in pieces that can get out a door, not through a window or craned out from the roof. And so small things like that in design will help the contractors price these projects so they're actually easier for the clients to implement.
Yeah, so I think it's almost from a like even earlier point in the process where, you know, our industry isn't really known for innovation, right? And I feel like what I come across often with contractors, especially for residential, is that you know, they're tied to how they've always done things, right? That's actually a big problem where it's like, even if it's not doesn't have anything to do with sustainability, but I want like a different trim detail, right? There's pushback. And so I think like some of it is just education. How do we give more education on like what's available out there? How do you do this? You know, even asking my own GC on my own project, right? It's like, what's a better way or what's a better insulation that we can use? They've never done it before, right? And so they have to go do research, there's pushback. A lot of it's an education and availability problem as well as like a price point problem. So, you know, we are a service-based company, and so we try to push as much as we can. It's not in our contract, but within our power, you know, like say a client does want to redo their entire furnishings that were just done a few years ago. That's actually happened to us. And so we're like, okay, well, what can we save? What can we use, right? Because ultimately, I think there is this tension between like, yes, they could keep everything, but if their whole house makes them miserable and they don't feel any joy, then there's a problem, right? We should address that, right? That's our job. And so, you know, it's not always possible to like be 100%, but it's like, what can we realistically do that works with the new space planning that works better for their life. And so, part of that also is just, resale. There's a huge resale market now, and we use that all the time. We consign the pieces and they find new homes. And so I think, it's really just about harm reduction in a way right now. Like, we have to take those steps to then fully get to, the full sustainability, right? It's these steps that we take to educate and kind of get people thinking about these things. But it's not going to be like a switch that's flipped overnight.
Eric, at Fireclay, do you have innovative technologies that you're using or that you're planning to use to reduce harm to the environment?
Yeah, and we found that it's in the places we didn't expect. We use a lot of natural gas. A lot of our biggest waste is carbon, and tile is heavy to ship. So we have to rely on trucks to bring materials to our factory and then trucks to get it to all of you. And we sell all across the country and all across the world. For years, we've measured our carbon intensity and taken steps to purchase offsets. So we offset all scope 1, 2, and 3 of our carbon emissions and certify that and are really focused on that. We had no capacity. So we've grown a lot over the last couple of years, and it's hard to build in California. It's hard to expand here. So we just were always up against capacity, couldn't have enough. So we had to get a lot more focused on scheduling and efficiencies. And that's honestly been our single best waste reduction initiative, is massive investments in technology to improve our scheduling, to better utilize our lines, our machines, our people. And unexpectedly, it sounds so obvious, but our gas usage, our electricity usage per square foot, dropped by 60%. And that was unbelievable. Now that was across 2 years, and we were oh my God, we're awesome. Now it's 3% incremental improvements, and we're how do we do that again? So I'd say really that was our most unexpected, but I think constraints really helps. And for us, every time we've been kind of pushed into a corner or had to innovate because we didn't have enough space, we needed to find new capacity, that's always been the place where we found the most innovation. And on the waste reduction side, like I said, it's come from very unlikely places. So that's our best success story by far.
What materials does your team feel could shift contract design to be more sustainable?
Well, so I'm in commercial. So drywall, metal studs and drywall are a big issue. And it's super wasteful. It's in terms of materials that have the greatest impact, that's where our focus is, right? If you look at, there's always these charts, those pie charts, and okay, base building takes up this much carbon energy, and then when you look at this other pie chart and you look at interiors and it starts to catch up over time, it actually exceeds base building, the lifespan of the base building, and then you look at the specific materials that are the cause of that for the interiors. For the architecture piece, it's the metal studs and drywall. So what are we doing? So we have a team. So we actually have a product development group, and they give out research grants. So we have an architect actually here in Oakland, in the Bay Area. I'm very proud of him. Jeremy Steiner is his name, and he's working on a project called Arbo. So it's kind of attaching itself to the whole mass timber craze. And so instead of building, and again, it hasn't been perfected, it still has a lot of work to do, but looking at building interior partitions with wood blocks. So it goes back to that old school Lego. We're going to build it out of pieces, and we're going to be able to take it apart. So using a material that actually has all the ratings, everything that you need, acoustical ratings, STC, and rather than doing it with studs and drywall, we're going to do it out of wood. The issue that he's coming across, Rich, which you can imagine, wood blocks weigh a lot. And so you have to get this into the building, you have to be able to move them, right? And so there's a cost behind that. Anything that weighs more is going to cost more, relatively. So that's one thing that we're doing. There are other things. There's a whole team in New York that is focusing on materials that are made from biophilia, looking at more of the biometrics piece of the materials, which is a whole study. And those are the specialists. These are the people that went to school for it. I'm not one of those people. But they're really pushing kind of forward with looking at, if you take a space, right, a professional services space, law firm, beautiful view, it's up at 555 Cal, and you would build it traditionally out of these types of materials, a lot of millwork. How can you have that same feel and look, but with materials that do not impact the environment?
What do you think is the number one most wasteful practice that you find?
Actually,
How would you propose to solve it?
Yeah, so in my world, we actually chatted about this on the call a little bit. It's the builder flip that, someone buys a builder flip, but they hire a designer, you go in, they're like, I hate all of this. And, it's for good reason, right? Because the builder probably used the cheapest materials available in some cases, and they didn't really have a designer. The flow's awkward. It's not something that you really want to live with, that they just put it in there to sell it. And so I think that's probably like one of my biggest gripes that I see. And how do we solve that? I think ultimately what it comes down to is like having a buyer for a potential space, right? And so if you have a buyer, they do this in some communities where you can customize the space before you move in, right? They don't, you sign the lease or you sign the agreement to buy a place, and then it's built to actually your liking and what you want. And so I don't know how to implement that on a large scale with all these individual builder flips, but something has to change there. Or it's like maybe even it's about just putting in materials that the vast majority of people would be great with, would be happy with, right? And not doing something that's for temporary usage. I think that's probably what it comes down to, is like this is meant to be temporary, and like that's what causes so much waste. It's like design for the long term, design for what's timeless and what will stay.
That's a great answer. I would, probably a few years ago, I might have said samples, but I feel like Material Bank solved that one, and they're awesome. Just be like really candid with you all, and this is something that like only benefits the type of company that we have. We have this whole thing of overage with tile. I see a lot of head nods, and I don't know how to solve that one. And it's great for us because on any project we get like 15% more of a sale. But then I just know that outside of like, some breakage and cuts, like a lot of this just sits in people's garages. So I don't quite know how to solve that, especially for a product like ours that's made to order and people are choosing it for that very specific reason. But I mean, 10 to 15% every year, I mean, it has value because if they need more, that's like really bad. But that's something that I like, it keeps me up at night in terms of like what to do with that. That's a frustration for our business, and I think it probably affects a lot of you, and not just tile, but in other products as well. So,
well, James was here talking about it earlier, and you're going to start to see a lot of this, right? This like essentially online platforms that are for resale, because contractors always overorder just in case, especially with super aggressive deadlines. They're just going to, we just want to make sure we have it. Because mistakes are made, and so all of that overage could be resold, right? If you can quickly get it online, get it back out there, and then there's lead time issues, right? My project really needs that tile. We can get that tile. Oh my God, there's the Fireclay, really? And it actually is perfect for a small bathroom or something, your kitchen, backsplash. I think that may be one way, hopefully, to solve that issue. I think the overage thing is like, I think probably easier thing, because the stuff is essentially still new. Right, it's maybe still in a box. The stuff that is coming out is a little harder to kind of sell in those marketplaces.
So, Marcus, I've got one question for you. What do you think it takes to establish a robust reuse materials market?
Demand. Demand. I mean, the supply, so there's plenty of supply. So you just, again, going back to the online platforms, those things will provide visibility. Right, to know that it's there. Okay, the Fireclay, oh, there it is. There's some out there. Wow, I didn't know about that. Right now, it's like, it's networking. It's like calling Christine, like, hey, did you see that Fireclay? Are you going to take that? I thought you had a project. So that's what's happening now. So the online will provide visibility, but the demand is something that we're going to need to work on that, because that's hard, right? We're going to have to like work as an industry to help our clients understand that. To your question, remember when you asked the question about like to Christine about how do you tell your clients that about this? Like for me, you're just like doing it seamlessly. You're not being kind of sneaky, but you're just putting these materials in the project, and it's like they didn't know. Like it's fine. Cost is fine. Everything is okay. So I think the demand piece is something you just have to help build that. I think it's policy. So James's world, like the Department of the Environment is building policy, so it creates incentive for contractors that are like, we have to do this. What are you talking about? Our job is hard enough as it is. You're creating incentive to help this process move forward. So if you're submitting for a building permit and you're doing, say, reuse or putting certain materials into your project that are helping the environment, you go front of line. You speed up the process. So small incentives like that will, I think, help with the demand piece, which I think is super key.
Eric, can you talk about the production process of your clay, your tile, and then how you plan inventory amounts?
Yeah. Has anyone ever seen a tile factory? I see some head nods. That's awesome. You should come see ours. We're just down in just about an hour south of San Jose, so just about an hour and a half south of here. Yeah, I mean, we source clay from sources close by, mostly Sacramento. We take it, we mix it with water, and we push it through a giant extruder, which basically looks like a big pasta machine, and it comes out in a ribbon, and we cut it into 40 different sizes, put it through a kiln to make what we call a bisque, and then we put beautiful colors on it, put it back in the kiln, and out comes out the most beautiful tile in the world. We do that here in California. We recently purchased another factory in Eastern Washington, which honestly, I didn't really actually think about it until today. We did a huge expansion project here, and we were actually gonna do more. We were about to build like another building, and because we needed more capacity. And this factory came in for sale in Eastern Washington, which is a really old building that had been neglected, and we ended up buying it, and we've been revitalizing it. And there was a workforce of about 90 people. It was a company that had seen declining sales year on year on year. And so, it just made me think about kind of like, a new build versus kind of an old build. And I never really thought about that in that way, but yeah, I think in terms of like American manufacturing, there's a lot of opportunity for revitalizing these factories and breathing new life into them. So we've done our little part there. But yeah, I mean, I think that, for us, we're a small player. There's about 3 billion square feet of tile consumed in the United States. About 75% of that is made outside of the United States, mostly China, India, Brazil, Spain, Italy. We made about 2 million square feet last year. We'll do about 4 million this year, and we have capacity for about 10 million. So we're still like a drop in the bucket, but very much believer in U.S. manufacturing and kind of keeping manufacturing close, getting it as close as possible to people. Again, I mentioned we make it all to order. So, inventory is something where we're not really taking big bets. At the same time, most of our industry does purchase in terms of like, I need it yesterday. So we are trying to lean more into that in a thoughtful way. And the nice part about tile is it never goes out of style, at least the kind that we make. And so, it's gonna work, and our inventory doesn't really go obsolete, which is really fantastic. So yeah, I mean, hopefully that's a little bit of insight into how we do it, which, and we're the manufacturer and the seller. So most of the tile industry is consumed and purchased by going from manufacturer to potentially distributor to retailer to end user. So we've really cut out that process, which we think also reduces waste because we go direct to the customer and get to kind of really connect it and shorten the sales cycle and make sure that no mistakes are made along the way, or as few as possible.
What are the most common barriers associated with implementing reuse? I know you mentioned, of course, clients for sure. What are some other barriers?
Yeah, well, so I think reuse, inherently there is, in the reuse market, right, it's a lot of one-offs, a lot of, like, if you look at vintage, right, and to find something very specific for like a need that you have, whether it's like dimensional or functional, it takes a lot of time, right? And so even though like the projects that use a lot of vintage, those are some of our highest billing, projects, because it takes hours to find the right piece. So I think that's a barrier where it's like, we can't just source vintage for any project, right? If you have a low budget, that's not gonna work because it takes so much time to find exactly what you need for the space. Another is, we try to reuse a lot of people's existing furnishings as much as we can, right? Whatever has sentimental, emotional, functional value still, we definitely try to keep those. And what can be cost prohibitive too is, reupholstering that piece or refinishing it to make it work for the design. So I think, a lot of the stuff does come down to cost. Balancing that with, the sustainability factor, I think, that's the question for a lot of our clients.
I would say the biggest thing, Christine touched on it, time. It's all about time. There's just not enough time. You don't have enough time to really make the decisions quickly or in a way that will convince the client this is the way to go. And so if you can win time, if you can buy back time, that will assist. And so what we've been trying to do is create like reuse strategies at the beginning of every project. You start early as possible. We're trying to tell clients to actually start the reuse strategy even before we get on board, like at the real estate level, like do it. You know you're going to move. You're not going to do it like you didn't decide that yesterday. You decided a year ago. So start the re-strategy at that point. Bring in an auditor, have them go through your space, look at everything that you have in there and have them document it, create a catalog. Some of that stuff can be resold, some of it can go toward a salvaging partner for donation, but it has to start so early, because with time, you can then build essentially a budget that can be realistic, so when the person that's taking the space apart will have the numbers to do it correctly, right? So they're not saying, oh my God, that's really expensive, let's not do that. The re-strategy will also allow the design team, once they come on board, to see what's actually there, and they can then decide if it's practical for the project to move it forward, to use it.
Can you share anything that your company has in the works?
One thing I just want to mention, so I think that for us, and I think it would be similar to any company out there, like I think having the playbook is really helpful, right? I think the GFDA is really helpful for that. We got started on this journey years ago through B Corp certification. And so I think like there's a lot of good places out there that have like the checklists and the guides, and it's just kind of like, just do it, right? Just like start. I think for us, we've grown, and so we had the fortunate opportunity this year to actually engage a third-party consulting firm to really kind of come in and really support our efforts and really help us verify the work we're doing, but also help us set some larger targets. And so we're working through that. We're doing a lot of the kind of detail analytical work. We're doing things that are important in our industry, like EPDs and HPDs, which we've had, and we're updating them, life cycle assessments. But it's kind of like, what's the big goal? Like, what's our big initiative? Because I just was like, I don't really know what it should be. Which, as a CEO, I probably, like, you probably are like, what do you mean you don't know? Like, that's what you do. And I was like, I don't know what should it be? Should it be some 50% reduction by 20? So what really matters? Is it carbon? Is it waste? Is it like closer proximity to customers? Is it materials? So the goal is by kind of October to come out with some larger initiatives that are more cohesive to bring the entire company around. I'd say right now we're doing the hard work internally to make sure we understand even more of the data, more of the information, get better comps, who's doing a good job out there, which frankly, there's not a lot of people doing a great job. And then, set some really big initiatives that will take us forward. So that's what we're working on right now.
Yeah, so my company will probably never be as analytical about the
Don't say that, you might be.
Maybe, yeah. Right now, as a 10-person team, we're not going to be. But, I think a lot of it for us is about education. So educating my designers on, what types of fabrics to source for different use cases, what's more sustainable than other fabrics, or like where to source our furniture, or what finishes to use, right? And so I think that becomes, it's this education initiative that is most important, because we're doing the recommending to our clients, and so we have to know what's out there, and we have to just stay on top of what vendors are providing, and so that way we are able to be the best resources for our clients.
Well, thank you very much. I think we will now turn to the audience for questions.
I actually have one. Since Marcus represents commercial, Christine represents residential, you kind of play in both camps, so you're exempt from the question. How can the two work together or learn from each other, the two industries? Because you seem to be at odds, or at least completely apart. So how can we learn from each other?
I'll go first. So yeah, commercial spaces are built differently. Like a door from a commercial office will not work unless you have a 10-foot ceiling. Typically it's not going to work in your residential setting, and I don't think the residential client would really want that type of door in their house, but I could be maybe wrong. But I think one of the ways that we can work together, if we do find ways, so there may be materials coming out of some of these commercial spaces. There's a whole trend, like everything wanted to be residential. It's still happening, right? They're like, let's turn the office into home. And so if there are materials that are coming out, unique pieces, I actually sent Katie something like 2 years ago, right during like the middle of the pandemic. We were having a tech client decommissioning their space, and there's a really cool, like interesting bar that the client had obtained when they built out their space originally. That came from New York, was from Brooklyn, beautifully detailed. And I thought of Katie immediately because I had just met her online, And I thought, hey, this would be, maybe her clients would want this, right? Maybe a residential house, kitchen would really see this as like a really unique piece. And so I think that's one way. Like we're essentially just the eyes for the residential side, and if we see something that would work, we'll send it to our friends on the residential side. And I think maybe, I don't know, maybe it could happen, yeah.
Totally. No, so I was going to say, like, I actually get a lot of inspiration from commercial spaces. Like right now, a lot of us on the team, we really want to use linoleum, which, you know, has all these bad connotations from the past, but it's actually a very sustainable material. And so we're like, how do we work this into a residential project? You know, what client is going to say yes to linoleum? And it might have to be myself, but, you know, I think that's part of it, is just like taking inspiration from what's happening in the commercial world, because there tends to be a little bit more innovation there.
I'm so glad you brought up linoleum, because I'd learned a lot about liquid linoleum. Are you familiar with that? Oh, it comes out in the Netherlands, like everything innovative with the interiors, but it's used mostly commercially, and I think there's a distribution center in Texas, Dallas maybe, but that seems like a really exciting application that could be used for residential, but it's not yet. It's used like in hospitals and in larger format uses, but I think there's a lot of exciting materials. Hempwood, there's some, I'm coming from the sustainable materials side of it, but that I think also relates to reduce waste, just sourcing materials that are already made to be less wasteful. I don't even think I'm asking a question anymore.
Thank you for the tip. Definitely check it out. Yeah, the incentives have to be aligned somehow, right? Because ultimately, for majority of people, it's not about this long-term impact. It's about their wallet, right? And so I think, yeah, I think it's really also, maybe it's about, like, I don't know, for the white grout, right? Like, it's easy to do gray grout, and maybe it's education or data on, like, how people love gray grout because it saves them time on cleaning, and that's actually a selling point. So it's like, how do we create selling points for these real estate agents and like better design practices? It's like you'll actually get a higher value. I'm actually doing a flip myself, you could call it, but we basically built 2 condos. I'm gonna live in the top one and I'm gonna sell the bottom one. And I specifically didn't spec white grout, right? And so it's like thinking through all those things where it's like, how would someone really want to live here? How do we make it a really great place to live? Because that's what's going to sell the property, right? And give you a higher premium for it. So maybe it's about educating and, you know, telling people like, this is actually what sells, right? Not having an entry closet, that sucks, right? Like, so like, you know, what are these best practices that people can implement? And maybe it's creating those numbers for people to see.
Yeah. When I spec white grout, the builder called realtor and was like, this has to be wrong. It's not white. It's like, that's on purpose. Yeah. You know? But it's just opposite of.
Have we mentioned like ChatGPT and AI today? Does that come up? No. I just feel like it has to be said. But I mean, you know, we're starting to work with AI technologies, and I mean, renderings are a huge part of what we're doing to help the sales cycle. I think technology is going to be hugely valuable in terms of getting people to understand what a space will look like. I think what you said earlier, just in terms of specifications, designs, drawings, like having precision in that. I think that's going to be really helpful. So I'm really bullish on that, and trying to see where we can be involved in that, trying to learn a little more about that, getting connected to more companies in that space right now, because I think we're at a moment where someone like myself, who's not an engineer, can start to understand and learn and play, and I think it's going to be really interesting.
Hi. There's been a couple comments and questions throughout the day about language and framing, and so this is sort of a high-level question. A lot of what we're talking about are actually challenges within our economic system, sort of economic models of how all this works together, and a lot of work is happening around the circular economy, like the concept and the reality of circular economy. And I wonder what your reactions are to the idea of even moving away from language that is explicitly about sustainability or environmentalism and framing it within sort of a circular economic model so that incentives are essentially baked in to the entire process.
Is that a question for me?
Whoever wants to answer it, yeah.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I always think of like, you know, the Netherlands when I think of like that type of environment, right, where they're so far ahead and everything that you see there, you're like, oh my God, I want to live there. This is amazing. And they have to, right? They had to a long time ago. This was like, they didn't have the land. They don't have, you know, space for landfill. They had to kind of consider this. Based on your question, what I think about was that social side of materials. And so, you know, my dream would be, you know, again, I work in the commercial sector. I think of downtown San Francisco. You're taking apart one building, and the pieces of that building are being used to construct the building next door, or they're being used to replenish a renovation for the building next door, and they're all connected. Anything that's leaving, you know, it's almost like these like districts, right? And so I think of, you know, the future being that way. It helps with like lead times. It helps with cost, transportation, you know, the timing. And so if everything was designed in that way, the whole system, it would, you know, it would go beyond the kind of environmental piece. It would be economic as well. There would be jobs associated with that kind of like rejiggering of all the parts.
I think there's like a cultural component too, where, you know, we're talking about where does it start. You know, we have obviously a big impact on that, but, you know, as a society, right, it's about overconsumption. It's about, you know, the latest thing. And so I feel like that's really like the root of it, where overconsumption is what's often like causing these issues. And so how do we change that as a society? I don't know the answer, but you know, it's very complex, right? There's a lot of systems that have to change.
I guess for Eric, I'm curious on the tile side. Is there a way to like repurpose old tile through your process, or like, you know, outside of Fireclay, but take file, burn it down, and repurpose it again? I know nothing about that.
Yeah, we do a little bit of that, and we reuse a lot of our own materials. We reuse glaze waste and closed loop water systems, things like that. So we do have some components of kind of crushed up tile that we reuse, not to the levels that would kind of replace the full ecosystem. There are companies out there that, you know, are cradle to cradle certified. I have competitors who have tile take back programs. I generally believe it's all kind of bullshit, because from everything that you all know about, you know, job sites, you're not really taking tiles off a wall and putting them in a box, sending them back to those manufacturers, but people like to tell those stories. So we could say that. We don't. People have tried to get me to do it. I'm like, no, we're never going to accept someone's tile from their wall. Just not happening. Even though we could, I just don't see that as like actually happening in the real world. So, I mean, conceivably, yes, absolutely. One of our factories does a great job with that. The other one, we're less able to do it. So it's possible, just not great for us at scale, and it ends up having certain quality challenges along the way. So.
I think the mention of AI, did you mention AI?
Yeah.
Yeah, that made me think, you know, maybe one of the good things out of AI is maybe it can help us figure out how to reduce waste, you know, with overages and all that. Have you considered that?
Well, I don't think it's going to be long before what you were talking about with regard to being able to like go into an existing project, scan the room, and all of a sudden have a template of like how to take everything apart. We're partnering with a company called Skip Technologies. I don't know if any of you have heard it. I mean, they can go into a space, scan it with Matterport technology, and all of a sudden have like full architectural design drawings within basically a day with iterative design for tile. I mean, all this stuff. And I mean, that's pretty amazing. So I think this is going to move very quickly. I still think like construction and design are really hard, and I still don't think like humans or most of us like myself make good design decisions. So like we need professionals, but I think that it's going to have a lot of implications for a lot of us in ways that some of us are already imagining and some of us don't yet know. But I think it's at a unique moment right now where it's starting to become a lot more accessible to us, and I think that's really important. So, I mean, even like something, it sounds silly, but like, you know, if you wanted to say to a contractor, you know, I want to make sure that like all of these things happen on a job site, right? You can go to ChatGPT and like have like a whole kind of workflow or checklist of things that you want to make sure that happens on a job site. And it's not just like trying to remember it. It's like, okay, let's take all of the world's information to create that checklist. And that's like incredibly powerful. And otherwise we would have maybe talked about it or thought about it, and now like that can happen. Or, recycling policies or reuse policies. So I just think it's really accessible all of a sudden. It's really interesting, and I think it will help us get more efficient.
Really interesting. Thank you all. I think some of this technology exists with certain construction firms too, if I understand. They have a way of going in ahead of time. I think, Marcus, you were talking about that, and assess size and materiality for the quantities.
There's a lot, yeah, construction technologies, like sometimes they all have the nice toys. We don't have the nice toys. They have, the robots that essentially now, like Dusty the robot, which looks like one of those vacuum machines that you have at your house, that essentially lays out the space. And so your Revit model or anything that you're sending a digital file has to be exact, because if it's not, Dusty will draw it the wrong way and you're too late. They've already framed it. So that stuff is happening. But I think the AI piece will be part of that. It's all it's great. It's a great opportunity, but it's also super scary because will that take away like parts of our jobs, right? It's like, is it like that administrative part that we do that we don't really want to do, but we have to do? Will that take that or some of the design as well? So we have to be careful.
No, never.
Well, I'll just be better.
Well, thank you to our panelists and our moderator. It was a great afternoon. Thanks.